Last year's NFL draft was all about Jameis Winston versus Marcus Mariota. So Winston went first overall to the Bucs, but he didn't look like the #1 pick overall on Sunday. 4 interceptions, lost a fumble against the Cards. Meanwhile, the second overall pick, Mariota, led the Titans on an 83-yard game-winning drive on the road against the Lions. Herm's still here with us, but I want to start with Stephen A. on this one. Stephen A., have you changed your mind on Winston being better than Mariota after seeing that performance?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible afternoon for him. His worst game as a professional. There's no doubt about that. He's got to go through some growing pains, and that certainly doesn't help matters. We understand that, but it's an aberration. I saw him struggle in college and look miserable and come back in the same game, let alone other games. I saw him do the same thing as a rookie with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year. When I think about Mariota, I'm not somebody who's down on Mariota. I'm not somebody who believes he can't play, that he can't get it done, that he's not going to be a good quarterback in this league. But when I think about Jameis Winston, again, it's the anti-Jay Cutler. I think he is a leader. I think he is about winning. I think he's filled with guts and heart. I think he galvanizes troops around him, and I think his energy is infectious and contagious. So what it does come down to is his ability. And does he have the ability to get the job done? He has shown periodically that he can. They're still growing as an organization. I think he'll be fine, but I think those intangibles that he brings to the quarterback position is what I give him as an edge over Mariota in Tennessee. Mariota's good, but I'm rolling with Jameis.
A lot of people prematurely ordained Winston this year. They coronated him over Mariota like it wasn't a discussion anymore because Winston played the Atlanta defense, Mariota played the Minnesota defense. Of course, the guy playing the Atlanta defense looks a lot better week 1. I said it's too early to tell. As Luke Deneen points out from USA Today's For the Win, Winston looks the part. Winston's got a big arm and big charisma and leadership abilities, so we see star quarterback written all over him. And he was drafted #1 because of his accomplishments in college, which were extraordinary. But actually, when you look at the numbers, completion percentage, yards per attempt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's all Mariota. Now, I'm not saying that makes Mariota better than Winston, Coach, and I also don't mind the interceptions from Winston because I like to see a guy, just like turnovers from a point guard, especially when they're young. I like to see him champing at the bit. I like to see a guy who's trying to win and, most importantly, isn't afraid of losing. So sometimes I even like to see some turnovers, especially when they'll air it out down the field. So I'm not even holding that part against Winston. I'm just talking about what I see from Mariota, Coach. I think it's too early to make the call is what I'm saying. They're both excellent.
Well, I'm pulling for both these kids because I know that our league is much better when young quarterbacks perform well. Now, they have different personalities. And sometimes, you know, we listen to our personalities and we get attached to personalities of players like coaches. And Winston is one of those big personalities. And Stephen A's got him pegged. He's exactly right. He's a competitor. I coached a kid coming out of high school before he went to Florida State. I still talk to the kid. Love him. Like he's my son. You know, big, strong guy, throws the ball, falls in love with his arm. Footwork is not always matched up with his throwing motion. He's going to throw it high. You know who else throws it high? Cam Newton. A lot of high balls. Because sometimes their footwork and they're so athletic, they have that arm, it gets away from them. Mariota's personality, and I'm not saying he's there. I'm not saying he's going to become this guy. A little bit like Eli Manning. Doesn't say a whole lot, does he? Eli Manning's like one of those guys. Is this guy leading? Is he a lead? People question Eli. Said, is this guy a leader? Can he do this in New York? Doesn't say a lot. Mariota's the same kind of guy.
But, Coach, when his helmet was twisted halfway around his head against that San Francisco defense in the playoffs in the NFC Championship, and he's getting up off the turf and winning the game, then he's a leader. I
understand that, but I'm just saying, so Mariota, don't look at his personality, because he's not going to have that same that Winston has. Yep. But he has all the attributes of becoming a very good quarterback in our league. And I'm pulling for both these kids. I really am. And that's going to be, we're going to talk about this the next 10 years, right? Because these guys will be in the league. Hopefully they'll be successful. And then when we talk about who's won more championships, who's won more divisions, that's a good thing.
I just want to point out, Coach, to the people who thought the ship had sailed already, that the argument was over because of week 1 of this year. Listen, Winston has the thing Stephen A. talking about, big arm, big charisma, leadership, all that. Mariota has better legs and is more accurate, and I don't know who's going to be better. I think it's going to be interesting to watch.
Mariota, because of the offense he played in, and this is the knock on him, vertical passing down the field, not as accurate. 10 to 12 yards, very good. We saw him do that against Detroit. Final drive, he goes down, hits a couple really nice passes, accurate, within that window. His problem has been the ball down the field. That's all work in progress. These guys are still young. They're still young quarterbacks.
All right.
All right.
Stephen
I
Hayes.
just think that in today's NFL, I just believe that in today's NFL culture, when you talk about the quarterback position, it's not just about your individual abilities to throw the football. It's about your ability to lead.
Yes.
I've seen several situations where, as a quarterback, you are able to get somebody else to be every bit as good as they can be because you're there.
I'm just saying, careful.
I don't diminish or underestimate that.
I'm just saying, careful how you interpret the personality. Like, no knock on Phillip Rivers. I love Phillip Rivers. I think he's become underrated. But he's more of a kind of Winston personality than, say, Eli Manning. But Eli's sitting there with 2 Super Bowl MVPs. So there are different ways to lead.
Some people lead by
remember,
action.
both these guys went to teams that there was a lot of veterans, right? They started as rookies. You've never heard any veteran on that team say these guys are not leaders. Not even Mariota.
Very good
They
point.
speak very highly of Mariota. If you go in that locker room and say, man, this is our guy.
Good point.
We like this guy. So
Good point.
he's got the guys in the locker room that we'll ride with this one. We
Yep.
riding with him.
And
now in that other locker room in Chicago right now, the guy been playing 11 years.
You're so small.
No one in the locker room is saying we'll ride with him.
You know why? Perfect transition for me right now.
I'm just trying to help you out.
Please stay with us.
Trying
Thank
to
you.
help you
Just
out.
drop the mic. Well, we've seen many players follow Colin Kaepernick's lead, deciding not to stand or making some sort of statement during the national anthem in order to bring attention to social injustice. And last night was no different, as the Eagles' Malcolm Jenkins, Stephen Means, and Ron Brooks stood with raised fists during the national anthem on Monday Night Football. Meanwhile, more tragedy has struck our country. In Tulsa, an unarmed black man was killed by a white Oklahoma officer who was responding to a stalled vehicle. The man can be seen in police video walking away from officers and toward his SUV with his hands up before he approaches the driver's side door, where he drops to the ground after being shocked with a stun gun, then fatally shot. This is exactly the type of thing the players have been trying to bring awareness to. Stephen A., how long do you expect these protests to continue?
It's not going to stop anytime soon. And when things like what transpired in Tulsa the other day, continue to happen, it's my fear that it's only going to intensify. And I want to say that if it does, one could argue that there's going to be legitimacy to the protest that ultimately will come forward. I want to read something to y'all a friend of mine sent me from Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, obviously in the 60s, of course, before he was assassinated. He was talking about protests that were ongoing, obviously fighting for civil rights and what have you. And he talked about the things that existed. He said it speaks to people wanting these speaking to people wanting these protests to stop at the time. He said the sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. Now, I bring those words up because on my radio show on Sirius XM, Mad Dog Sports Radio, every weekday from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I've had a multitude of white individuals call into my show, very thoughtful, God-fearing, decent Americans, just with a different point of view. And they were saying, when is this going to stop? I had one caller call me yesterday and say, if any of these Eagles protest tonight in any way, I'm going to be done with them. And I simply retorted by saying to him, think about what you're saying. They're getting on one knee or they're raising the fist, okay? That's what they're doing. They didn't impede anybody's ability to watch the game. They didn't impede the game from happening in any way. They didn't stall traffic. They didn't serve as an inconvenience to anybody. All they did was bring attention to inequities and inequalities and injustices that have been taking place in this country for decades, if not centuries. That's the reality of the situation here. And when you have people And I have friends and loved ones who are completely against Colin Kaepernick, who are completely disgusted with him and done with him and anybody who mirrors his behavior, because their mentality is, how dare you insult our nation, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, how? How is he doing that? When he's bringing attention to the fact that our Pledge of Allegiance, that our Star-Spangled Banner, that, being indivisible with liberty and justice for all, the words that this country was founded upon, when you're challenging whether or not it's living up to that, because some people are receiving it, but other people in this nation, particularly black individuals, some who appear to be unarmed, are not receiving. How could you have a problem with that? Especially when the athletes themselves have specifically articulated, in no way are they talking about our military. In no way are they talking about our servicemen and women who honor our country with their service. They're not talking about that. They're talking about the injustices that have taken place in this country, the violence that has been perpetrated against individuals, particularly of African-American descent. Nobody said that white folks aren't suffering from violence. Nobody said that Latinos aren't suffering from violence. What they're saying is that what we see in the news, what we see continuously perpetrated with little to nothing being done about it, is that black individuals are suffering at the hands of some of these police officers when they're unarmed, whereas an Uber driver who happens to be white in Michigan shoots 6 people and he's arrested. A Dylan Roof in South Carolina murders 9 folks in a church in South Carolina, black folks. And not only is he arrested, which means he lived, of course, but he's also taken to Burger King to get a bite to eat because he was hungry. How is it that black people are dying, but white folks are getting arrested? That's the issue here. And so it's something that needs to be addressed. And you can have a debate as to how it can go further from here, because just doing this, what's the ultimate thing you're trying to achieve? What will define success in this quest? All of those things are legitimate questions. All of those things are the things that need to be discussed. But what cannot happen and what cannot be tolerated is us as a community and us as a nation turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to what exactly is transpiring. Every time we want to sit up there and quell the noise about what's transpiring, some other event comes forward to remind us that we may not even be second-class citizens in this nation, that our lives really, really don't matter. And something needs to be said about it, and something needs to be done about it. So whether we agree or disagree with Colin Kaepernick, the moment he said social and racial injustice, the moment he brought that cause up, and he specifically articulated that in no way was he speaking against our military, from the moment he did that, I had no problem with it. And the fact that other people do says something to me about them, not about Colin Kaepernick.